Ladies and gentlemen, today, I will be doing an album review for Judas Priest's 13th studio album from 1997, Jugulator. If you don't know already, their former lead singer, Rob Halford, who sang on every Judas Priest album, up until their 12th record from 1990, entitled Painkiller, left the band in 1992 and would pursue both solo work and to sing in different bands, like Fight, and his solo project, simply titled Halford. Rob Halford was replaced by a new guy called Tim Owens, aka Tim Ripper Owens, named after the song The Ripper from their Sad Wings of Destiny album. He would sing on both this album and another called Demolition, which would be released subsequently in 2001. I will be reviewing that album after this one, just FYI. As for this album, Jugulator can be considered one of the worst metal albums of the 1990s. Tim Owens has terrible vocal command. He lacks so much finesse and genuine flair of Rob that was inescapable on the first 12 albums. In his delivery, he resorts to an unneeded amount of enunciation and overacted attempts at honest emotions, rage and menace, so to speak, which ends up making his whole vocal performances come across too boyish and contrived. Compared to Rob Halford, which has dynamic, flexible coolness, consider Tim Ripper Owens to be the voice equivalent of a little kid in Target running through the store and slamming their knees down on the ground to snatch up Yu-Gi-Oh cards and Johnny Test toys off the shelves and the display pegs. His tone on the title track, which appears first in the track listing, has this haze of Eddie Vedder syndrome and somewhat makes me think of the voice actor who plays Bobby Hill and Spinelli from Recess. He also sounds this way on the next track, titled Bloodstained, which is very stagnantly paced for a Judas Priest song. And his lyrics are repetitive, as they are cliché. Stylistically, the band hardly sounds like themselves. They've opted for the trends of that time period to carry their songs forward, most of which are on average longer than they typically have ever been, yet with little justification for such lengths. The longer song lengths are due to several factors, one being they've opted to employ elements of groove and thrash metal. And at the faster tempos, this style really does not suit them well, let alone evoke interest in me as a listener. Another thing is that most of the songs start with thematic intros, driven by effects and audio dialogue samples, as opposed to their core instruments, like on Death Row and Brain Dead with the theatrical narrations. Judas Priest has never done this in any of their songs on the first 12 albums. Once again, it's not something that's suitable for them. That growling sound at the beginning of Dead Meat does not sound menacing, it's just awkward and disgusting, as it is irritating. I had heard all 12 Judas Priest albums before listening to this one, and I've never heard any sort of growling at the start of their songs. This is yet another track that serves as a poor representation of Judas Priest. The skit in Death Row is corny, as well. It is also too slow-paced. I've heard of some people actually liking this song, so I guess they were forgetting that one element of classy gleam from their sound, particularly from the guitars. Poor Glenn Tipton and KK Downing must have been overwrought by surrounding influences of the erstwhile current and trending bands. Pantera and Machine Head may be great bands, but their sound doesn't belong in Judas Priest. Judas Priest have never sounded worse than on the song Decapitate. It even contains a shitty little sound effects of a swooping knife that's supposed to indicate someone is going to get their head severed, yet they forgot to top it off with a sound effect for penetrated human flesh. Why this masturbatory coyness? Rob Halford would never have written lyrics so simplistic. The lead single, Burn in Hell, tries way too hard to sound like Metallica's Enter Sandman. Is this really the interests of the band? They never needed to sound like Metallica before this. Painkiller didn't sound like Metallica. He does a shitty imitation of Rob's shriek. It's beyond repetitive and I can't even recall the part where a solo is performed. I often have to recheck this part, and when I do, I'm appalled by how watered down it is. It's far too short for Priest standards. And Glenn and KK don't even trade it off with each other. I'm talking about the one at 4.5 minutes. I can imagine a lot of devout Judas Priest fans back in '97 were shocked as well as disappointed when they first heard this single. Brain Dead continues this uneventful repetitive nature with Tim's obnoxious, overblown comic delivery. It's overlong and boring. Abductors is another attempt by Priest to sound like Metallica in the beginning. There is nothing different here from the first 7 songs. Once again, there's another solo that's too short, and has this unneeded amount of high-pass distortion filter added to it. Rhythmically, there's hardly any change up, so, what the fuck? For the past 15 minutes, I've kept wondering to myself how the main original band approved of this. Bullet Train sounds just like Bloodstained, Brain Dead, Decapitate and slews of other songs that have already passed. It has an unneeded atmospheric introduction, like the other songs. Instead of sounding like Metallica, they've opted to ape the sound of Fear Factory, which they didn't need to do. The album ends with Cathedral of Spires. It's confusing to understand why the inspiration here is not found anywhere else on the album. There's still a few servings of distastefulness from Tim, specifically, but it's made up for with the track introduction, because the lyrics don't seem to suffer there. There may have been a few mediocre entries in the Judas Priest catalog prior to this album, like Point of Entry and Turbo. Even so, those albums still have top-of-the-line vocal performances, as well as evident instrumental mastery by the other members. The stylistic approach on Jugulator isn't enough to showcase their true talent and skill, pre-established. At least Scott Travis' drums aren't too compromised, even though his tom hits are muffled in a few areas. They try way too hard to sound like Black Album era Metallica. The song topics come across poorly thought out, and that Tim Owens was just made a quick list of things that sound edgy, like monsters that attack the human jugular, decapitations, trains that spew bullets, and going to prison. Damn, at least progressive metal was turning into a commonality at this point in time. Why couldn't Judas Priest try to make progressive metal instead of groove metal? Worst of all, none of the songs are exciting. This is the Judas Priest meant for low-income houses in which the family has greasy junk food stains and scattered CDs in their cars, from bands and artists like Limp Bizkit, Insane Clown Posse, Eminem, Guns N' Roses, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, and Kid Rock. Bag me with a spoon. It makes me think of that, and all the Judas Priest fans who go out in public, when the sun is out, and buy and smoke cigarettes and watch shitty television shows on TV, about cars and motorcycles. And they put these shows on channels like Discovery and the History Channel, for crying out fucking loud. This is one of the worst metal albums of the 90s, and sadly enough, it's by Judas Priest. It just surpasses Turbo in that it's worse than that album. And neither this album, nor that one have any replayability. If you are new to Judas Priest, take my word. Avoid this album like the plague. Same goes with the album that follows this one. If you want to start listening to Judas Priest, listen to any of their albums before this one, like Sad Wings of Destiny, Sin After Sin, Stained Class, Screaming for Vengeance, and so on. Jugulator and Tim Ripper Owens can fuck off.